So the feedback from last week was, generally speaking, that nobody had a clue what was going on, and that it was all very confusing. Leon wants to just skip over it altogether and move on. Somebody else in Shul said to me they didn't have a clue. Who was that, Leon? Somebody else said they didn't have a clue what was going on. Can you? Oh, it was Johnny Halpin, yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a little go at a short summary of what we did last week.
Are you going to record it?
I'm recording it. Yes,
yeah.
I've managed to remember that. It is being recorded. So let's get the Gemara on the screen. If you're following, it's page 52. And let's just get it up on the screen. There we go. So what we said was we spoke about the idea of intercalating a month. Because a lunar cycle is 29, go on, Leon, tell us, 29 days, 12 hours. Oh, come on, surely you don't need to look it up.
44 1/3 seconds.
Yeah, it's about 29 and a half days, give or take.
Approximately.
Yeah, so we have some months have to be 29 days and some months have to be 30 days. That's the bottom line. Rosh Chodesh is, of course, the first of the month, but we don't know when the first of the month is until we know how many days the previous month's got. Because if it's a 29-day month, then Rosh Chodesh will be on the 30th day, and if it's a 30-day month, then it will be the following day. So adding in another day, making it a 30-day month, is called Ibur HaChodesh. It's the same word as pregnancy. It's intercalating the month, and the Mishnah said that we need 3 judges to do that. And then there was a whole discussion about why it said Ibur HaChodesh, intercalating the month. Surely it should have said Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the month. In other words, announcing the new month, sanctifying that day as Rosh Chodesh, because Rosh Chodesh is a sort of semi-holy day. How do you know it's a semi-holy day? Because there was, in the Beit HaMikdash, there was a musaf offering. There was an additional offering like there is on Shabbat and like there is on the Chagim. So the question was, why does it say Ibur HaChodesh? Should have said Kiddush HaChodesh. Abaye used the sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel excuse and said it was a printing error. And we didn't really like that. Rava, on the other hand, said, no, it wasn't a printing error as such. There were just a few words missed out. And it should have been intercalating and sanctifying, announcing when the month was going to be. And then there was a whole discussion about, and this is where it got a bit confusing, I think, which is that you didn't even need to do a sanctification because it would happen on its own. If Rosh Chodesh was going to be on the 31st day, in other words, if it was going to be a 30-day month, then the next day is automatically Rosh Chodesh because you can't have a 31-day Jewish month. So why bother? You don't need to bother. That was one opinion. And then we got to over here. And so then this is where we got to last time, to this little symbol here. So we talked about this. Right, that's what we did. It's all, it happens on its own. Now, Rav Nachman, this is where we got to.
Excuse me, Johnny, interrupting you. I asked you on Shabbat about the Eidim and the stars. That got nothing to do with this at all.
Yes, it does, but it's not. This is not the place where they tell us how they examine the witnesses. This is after the witnesses have come.
Yeah.
They've examined the witnesses. They've said, yes, the witnesses are okay. Now we're going to make the decision based on their testimony.
Right. Thank
you. This is all about number of judges. What you're referring to is in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where they go through very carefully what the questions they have to ask the witnesses, and they show them pictures of the crescent of the moon. Did it look like this? Did it look like that? And all of that chakirah, that examination of the witnesses, that is dealt with in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Here, the assumption is the witnesses have come. Now we're going to make the decision. How is that decision made? How is that decision announced? How many judges do we need to effect the decision once the witnesses have been examined and a decision has been made?
Thank you. That's a lot clearer. Thank you.
Okay, so Rav Nachman, we never spoke about Rav Nachman. We left it over here, which was Rebbe Elazar ben Tzadok said that if the moon is not seen in a time when you expect it, i.e. when it's going to be a 29-day month, then it's automatically a 30-day month, and you don't need to bother with sanctification of the month, because everybody will then know that the next day is Rosh Chodesh, because you can't have a 31-day month. That's where we left it last week. So Rav Nachman is now going to take a different view. Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman said, Kiddush achar ibur bishlosha. Before we said that when it said ibur, it was a printing error. That was Abaya's opinion. Rav's opinion was that there were words missing. Rav Nachman also says that there were words missing, but he does it in a different way. He says like this: in the situation where Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctification of the new moon, Achar Ibor, in other words, it's a 30-day month. The sanctification occurs after you have added in that extra day, Bishlosha. That ceremony of making the month, sanctifying the month, declaring the month, declaring the next day to be Rosh Chodesh, that tekes, that ceremony is performed by 3 judges, Bishlosha. That's if you make the sanctification after you've added in the day. B'yom Ibur, but if the new moon is declared on the day of the intercalation, i.e., so it's not a 30-day month, it's a 29-day month, Leka Kiddush, we don't have a ceremony of sanctification at all. Why? Because that's when it's meant to be. The standard month is 29 days. So basically what Rav Nachman is saying, he's saying, right, listen up, Bnei Yisrael. Rosh Chodesh will always be on the 30th day, unless 3 judges decide it's going to be the following day. So if you don't hear anything from 3 judges, then the assumption is that it's a 29-day month and the 30th day will be Rosh Chodesh. That is what we would call in today's parlance the default position. Okay, so the default position is 29 days. So if it's a 29-day month, you don't need to have a sanctification of the moon, of the month, because it will be understood, it will be obvious, because that's the default position that the next day is Rosh Chodesh. When, says Rav Nachman, do we have to have a Kiddush HaChodesh? If it's going to be an extra day. Now that's the opposite of what the previous Tana, which was Rava, said. I think it was Rava, yeah, Rava. Because Rava said, well, actually it's the other way around. if you have a 30-day month, everybody then knows that it's the 31st day is Rosh Chodesh, because you can't have the 31-day month. So Rav Nachman and Rava are taking opposite viewpoints as to when you do Kiddush HaChodesh. Now, you're all going to say to me, well, wouldn't it be more sensible just to do Kiddush HaChodesh, to do this ceremony every month, whether it's a 29 or a 30, and then everybody will know where they stand. There'll be no assumptions, and it will be very clear to everybody what's going on. Julia's nodding away there. You agree, Julia, that would be a sensible thing to do. Well, you'll be pleased to know that, in fact, that is the halacha. That is what happens. They did have Kiddush HaChodesh on every month, not like Rav Nachman and not like Rava, but that was the decision that they came to at the end. So we've jumped the gun a bit there, but I could see it was bothering you. So I wanted to calm your nerves down to tell you that it was done in every month. Now, Rav Nachman says that we only do this ceremony if it's going to be a 29-day month. And the Gemara asks the same question it asked last time. Ummani, who is this like? Pelemo, he. This chap called Pelemo. Pelemo, a very interesting name, this. Rav Steinsaltz tells us a little bit about it on the left-hand side here. And I'm going to add something to this. He says Pelemo was among the last of the Tanaim. He was a disciple, or perhaps a disciple colleague, of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, of course, was the one that wrote down the Mishnah. His opinion and incisive questions are cited in several sources, and he is also described as one of the most pious people of his generation. Now, why am I telling you that? Because it's an interesting name. I've got it. There it is. It's an interesting name, Pelemo. What does it sound like to anybody?
It sounds like the guy in Tanis Esther.
Which guy in Tanis Esther?
They talk about Poloni as opposed to it.
That's what I thought you were going to say. That's in Ruth, Michael.
I'm sorry, in Ruth. I meant Ruth. Sorry, yeah, sorry.
You're absolutely right, Michael. Spot on. That's exactly what I was thinking of. In Ruth, if you remember the story of Ruth, she goes to the field and she's a widow of Naomi's son. And there is an opportunity for her property to be redeemed because her husband died. So the next of kin has to come along, or has an opportunity, to do yibum, to marry her, and at the same time to get her property. So the Megillat Ruth tells us the story of what happens. Boaz, who was not the next of kin, he was second in line in terms of the relative, comes along and says, okay, I will redeem you, I will redeem the property and I will marry you, but there's one chap who is higher in the pecking order than me, and he gets first dibs. So he says, well, we'll go and find out, and we're not told this fellow's name. He's known as Ploni Almoni, which means so-and-so. If we had any of the Americans here with us, they would tell us that in America, they call it John Doe. So when they don't know who it is, we would say in English, I did anyway, when we're up in the north, I don't know about in the south, maybe you could tell us what goes on in the south. But if you want to talk about so-and-so, you'd say Fred Bloggs. Yeah?
Or the man on the Clapham omnibus.
Yes. That's Mr. Joe Average, is the man on the Clapham omnibus. That's right. I was told when I first started doing medical negligence work, and I went to one of the Bond Salon courses, I was told that I had to imagine that I was the GP on the Clapham omnibus, Mr. Joe Average GP. So
that's to do with reasonableness, and John Doe is to do with being unknown. So if they have a body, I'm a great reader of detective stories. If they have a body and it's not identified, then that would be John Doe. They're not really comparable, and nor really is Fred Bloggs, but I can't think what is.
Yes, I think you're right. Of course, I think Fred Bloggs is more comparable than the Clapham Omnibus. You're right. The Clapham Omnibus is Mr. Average, not Mr. Anonymous. Plony Almoni was Mr. Anonymous, and if we look at the story in Rut, it's interesting because he's not given a name. He's just called Plony Almoni, John Doe, Mr. Anonymous. And that is, the Mepharshim there are all very critical of him. And they say he abrogated his responsibility. He had a responsibility to step up and redeem the property of Naomi and Ruth, and he failed to take on the responsibility. And for that reason, his name is lost to posterity. He lost his opportunity for greatness. And of course, that is true because Boaz stepped up to the plate. And as we know, the great grandson of Ruth and Boaz was, of course, David Hamelech. So the irony of Plony Almoni, and that is what the Mepharshim say really, is this Plony Almoni in Ruth is called Plony Almoni, Mr. Anonymous, because he chose.
Unknown soldier.
Yeah, well, not really, because the unknown soldier, in a way, the unknown soldier is a praise, isn't it? Because this is the guy that gave his life for the country. What the Mepharshim are saying is that this chap chose anonymity and chose to made a decision which denied him the opportunity of being the progenitor of King David. So the expression Plony Almoni has come to mean an anonymous person. Now, our Mishnah here, and in fact, if you look at the screen, you'll see this the bit here of Steinsaltz, is that this guy was far from anonymous. This guy was a big shot. He was a disciple or even a colleague of Rabbi Yehuda Anossi. They don't come any greater than that. And yet, very interestingly, he's not given the title Rabbi. He's not Rav Nachman. He's not Rava, which is the same idea as Rabbi. He's just called Palemo. And there are opinions that actually that Rabbi Steinsaltz has written is not correct, and that he was an unknown Tana, and the name Plemo is in fact a copy of the name Plony, as Michael said. So there are two different opinions as to who he was. He's mentioned in Menachot, I think, and in Kiddushin as well. I looked it up. Don't think that I know that off the top of my head. I don't. I looked it up last night. Anyway, that's the question. Is Mani, whose opinion is Rav Nachman's? Plemo. It's Plemo. Detanya, because we have learnt in a Braita, Plemo Omar. Plemo says, Bismano ein mekadshin oto. If you make the month in its correct time, i.e. after 29 days, you make Rosh Chodesh, you don't bother with a tekes, with a ceremony. Shelo bismano, if it's not on time, as it were, in other words, it's late, it's the following day, then mekadshin oto. We do make the ceremony. Okay. Now, that was Rav Nachman's opinion. Let's move on. And then soon we'll get out of this subject, which is not very exciting to some people. Rav Ashi Amar. Rav Ashi said, La'olam chishub katanim. Really, it should have said chishub, the calculation. We had that word last week. the calculation is done by 3 judges. Because actually, the intercalation, the actual making of a 30-day month, can only be following the calculation. You don't just wake up one morning if you're a judge and say, oh, I think I'll stick an extra day on today. No, you do the calculation based, you do the intercalation based on working it all out, the calculation. Now, what's the obvious question against Rav Ashi when he says this is that what it says down at the bottom here on the Steinsaltz, and that is the halacha is that we do it by witnesses, even after the calculations and the fixed calendar had already sort of come into use, we still used witnesses. So if we're using witnesses, what do we need to calculate for? We don't need calculations. We sit there and we wait for the witnesses to phone us up and they say, I've seen the moon, and you ask them the questions, and if you think that the answers are right, then you make Rosh Chodesh, and if you don't, then you jog them on until the next lot of witnesses come along. So what's this calculation they're talking about? So if you look at the notes down here in the Steinsaltz, interest 2 explanations. One explanation is that when you examine the witnesses, you know what the answers should be. You know, because you've done the calculation, when that moon is. You'll notice that when we bench Rosh Chodesh, we're going to do it this Shabbat. It's Shabbat Mevorachin this Shabbat. Rosh Chodesh is Sunday and Monday, because Av is always a 30-day month in our calendar. So Rosh Chodesh is Sunday, which is the 30th of Av, and Monday, which is the 1st of Elul. So on Shabbat, we will announce when the new moon will be. And I, in our shul, and others in their shul, will say when the molad will be, when the moon will be first visible. In other words, the birth. The word molad, which you will hear, the molad will be on such and such a day at such and such a time. It's the same word as birth. The moon is born. So the birth of the moon, the molad of the moon, same word as yeled, right? Child, or yalda, female child, girl or boy. It's the same root of the word, molad. Ani nolad b'Manchester. I was born in Manchester. Okay. So the molad of the moon is the birth of the moon, and that is announced in shul before you make bench Rosh Chodesh. And in fact, the halacha is that the molad must be announced before the declaration of when Rosh Chodesh would be. You remember that when we bench Rosh Chodesh, which we'll do on Shabbat, we say the Yehi Ratzon, which is a introductory prayer, and then the molad is announced. The molad will be at such and such a time on such and such a day, and then the Chazan takes the Sefer Torah and says, Rosh Chodesh Elul, Yiyeh, Rosh Chodesh Elul will be, in our case, B'Yom Rishon, Ulamachrato B'Yom Sheni, on Sunday, and the following day on Monday. But you can't.
When is the moled, Johnny?
Sorry?
I don't want to put you on the spot, but when is the moled?
No, I haven't looked it up yet. But I suspect it will be sometime on Shabbat.
Yeah.
I suspect. I haven't looked it up yet.
Okay.
If you're at home and you don't come to shul and you want to know where it is, and you've got a Torah tidbits, it's always on the inside page 2. You always find it at the bottom. It's very handy. But where was I saying? Yes. So the Chazan takes the Torah and then says it. The halacha is that if you don't announce the molad, you shouldn't really announce the new month. You have to, the person saying it has to know when the molad is, which is why I remember when I was first married and I used to daven in the Prestwich Stiebel, which was a Vishnitzer Stiebel, that the Molad was announced in Yiddish. Why? Because it was necessary for everybody to understand it. Not that everybody spoke Yiddish, but when the Stiebel was first established, everybody spoke Yiddish. That was the lingua franca. People didn't speak English. When that shul was first started, everybody spoke Yiddish. So the tradition remained that the Molad was announced in Yiddish. Of course, when I davened in Shrubberies, which is, for the uninitiated, is a sort of United Synagogue style shul, the Molad was announced in English. And now here in Israel, of course, we announce the Molad in Hebrew, because that is the lingua franca. So you're meant to know when the Molad is before you announce the new moon.
I think we did it in Yiddish, and then they did it in English, so you'd understand what was happening.
Yeah, correct. That's a correct way of doing it. Yes, David.
Yeah, no.
Metal did it, like Johnny.
What Johnny just mentioned, I think, is a very interesting halachic issue in a shul like yours, where you have a large number of Anglos, whether the Molad actually needs to be translated into English for the benefit of the Anglos who don't understand Ivrit.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think there is, but then I'd have to do it in French as well, David, because we have a significant French contingent.
No, you ignore the French.
So you know what? I'm not getting into that. I think we'll stick with Hebrew, and maybe I'll announce it. If you want to know when it is, you can look in the Torah tidbits on page 2. But you're right. The Molad needs to be known before. So to go back to our little note here, what is Rav Ashi referring to? What is this chishub, this calculation? The calculation is that when these witnesses come along and say, so let's say for argument's sake, let's say the Molad is on Monday night at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? You've worked that out. The calculation has been done, and you've worked that out. If a witness comes and says, I saw the moon on Sunday night, and you know from your calculations that the Molad is not for another 24 hours, then they are probably mistaken. And you would take that into account when you're examining the witnesses. So the calculation that Rav Ashi is referring to is the calculation you've already done before you examine the witnesses. So if the Molad's on a Sunday and they say, we saw it on the previous Thursday, well, you can be absolutely sure that they're mistaken. What they've seen is not the moon, because the calculations don't fit. If it's just a day, maybe, I'm not sure, but certainly the calculation was known to the Bet Din before they examined the witnesses. So that's what, according to one opinion, what Rav Ashi means when it says the chishuv, the calculation, is what requires 3 judges. Another explanation is that that was the second one here. If you look, alternative, the calculation mentioned here may relate to the court's treatment of the testimony itself. The court may consider astronomical information about the precise time when the next new moon will appear in order to determine the reliability of the current testimony. That's what we've just said. That's the Meiri. The other explanation is you work out how many 30-day months you need. And we know that you need a minimum of 7 in the year. Otherwise, the year's going to be out. So let's say you come to the end of the year and you've only had 6 30-day months. Then you've got no choice. Your calculation is, I need an extra day in the year here, because I've only got, instead of having 354 days, which is a lunar year, my lunar year is only going to be 353. So no matter when the molad is, I'm sticking an extra day in to get my calculations right. And that is what they take into account. That's the other opinion.
Doesn't that seem to make the most sense?
The most sense.
Yeah, that explanation seems to me to make the most sense. If it's absolutely necessary that to ensure that the year doesn't have the wrong number of months, then surely that is a very sensible argument, and none of the others stand up against it.
You're right, except that only really applies towards the end of the year, doesn't it?
Well, I suppose so, but then
imagine you're in the first month,
absolutely.
right?
But if no, it's not really, because you should be more organised about it, and you don't want to leave it all to the end.
You're right. Of course, you're right. That you if you get to 3 months before the end of the year and you've only had one 30-day month, you're in trouble, aren't you? Because you need at least 7. So yes, of course, you have to be organised, but as the year goes on, this calculation becomes much more important, doesn't it? Because if you make a mistake, for example, in Nisan, in the first month, well, it's not such a big deal. You've got 11 months to correct it. But yeah, you're right. It is an important calculation. And of course, that was taken into account, not only with the months, but also not only with the months, but also the years, which is the next bit we're going to do in the Gemara, which is adding the extra Adar, the extra month, to keep the solar calendar in check with the lunar calendar, because of what we said last week, which is that Pesach, of course, has to be in the spring, not like the Muslim festival of Eid, which moves back 11 days every year, and therefore is not always in the same season. They hate it. The Muslims hate it when Eid is in the summer, because their fast that they have to do is obviously much longer than it is in the winter for them, because Eid comes at the end of their month of Ramadan. So Ramadan, the month of Ramadan also moves throughout the seasons, because the Muslim calendar is an entirely lunar-based calendar, as opposed to ours, which, as we said last week, is a lunar solar calendar. Right, so that was Rav Ashi. Now, let's go and say on the back of what Rav Ashi says, Chishuv HaChodesh, with regard to the calculation of the month, again, remember, I told you some months ago, I told you the counterintuitive translation of in means yes, when you'd think it means no, because ein means there isn't any. It took me a very long time when I first started learning Gemara to get my head around this one. In means yes. So Chishuv Chodesh in. With regard to calculation of the month, yes, I agree. We need 3 judges. Kiddush Chodesh, lo. But with regard to the sanctification, which is really only the rubber stamp of the situation of declaring the month, why do I need 3 judges for that? Once the calculation's been made, once the witnesses have been examined, what do we need 3 people to sign it off, as it were? Should just be 1, should be enough. That's what the Gemara says. It makes sense to me. And then he asks our question again, Mani, whose opinion is this? I'll tell you who it is, says the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer, it is Rabbi Eliezer. Ditanya, because we've learnt in a Breita. Again, reminder, Breita is the things that didn't quite make it into the final version of the Mishnah, but do have very significant power in terms of their influence on the halakha. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer says, Bein bismano, bein shelo bismano, whether it's on time or not on time, i.e. Rosh Chodesh, whether Rosh Chodesh is on time, i.e. the 30th day, or it's not on time, i.e. it's late, i.e. it's on the 31st day. Ein makadshin oto. We do not do this ceremony of sanctification. Why? And he quotes a pasuk in Sefer Vayikra. Shneimah, it says, "V'kidashtem et shnat hachamishim shana." You shall sanctify the 50th year. What are we talking about there?
Yovel.
Shemitah.
Yovel, the 50th year.
I mean, Yovel, yeah.
Yeah, Yovel, the 50th year, which of course, what's the English translation of Yovel?
Jubilee.
Jubilee. Jubilee. The English word jubilee is just a transliteration, really, of Yovel. Yud and J are always right? Yehuda is Judah, so a Y is J, and a V is a B. So Yovel is Jubilee. Jubilee is a word which originates in the Hebrew of Yovel. So they're talking up here about the 50th year. So the Torah says, and you shall sanctify the 50th year. What's that got to do with us? What is Rabbi Eliezer's point here? Anyone want to have a hazard a guess as to why Rabbi Eliezer has brought that?
If it says you have to do it on the 50th year, then by implication, you don't do it anywhere else.
Correct, Michael. Absolutely correct. Look at the Gemara now. Shanim ata mekadesh. Years you sanctify. Ve'i ata mekadesh chodoshim. I ata. Like E efshar. What's efshar mean? Possible.
Possible.
And what's E efshar?
If it's possible. No,
E efshar
it's not possible.
Impossible.
No.
Impossible.
Yeah.
So the word E, Aleph Yud, means not. So shanim, years, ata mekadesh. Yes, you do sanctify. Ve'i ata mekadesh chodoshim. But you do not, and he translates it brilliantly here, formally sanctify months, as they are sanctified automatically. You don't have this ceremony of announcement of Rosh Chodesh. As I said to you, we don't paskin like that. The halacha is that we do, which is why we announce Rosh Chodesh. We are Mavarech in the Chodesh every month. We don't only do Birchat HaChodesh on the months where it's 29 days, or we don't only do it when it's months when it's 30 days, like Rava and Rav Nachman's opposite opinions. We do nowadays, don't we? We do it every month. We do a Mavarech in a Chodesh. And so so this again is not the halacha ultimately, but this is the thinking of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay. Now, is that clearer to everybody now than it was last week?
Can I just say that going back to Abaye said the sanctification of the new month is performed by 3 judges, also taught in a Baraita. So does that mean that we dismiss now the sanctification, and it says it's a statement of Rabbi Meir? So is Abaye totally wrong?
No, actually, turns out halachically, Abaye's opinion turns out to be the halacha, which is that we do the Kiddush HaChodesh every month.
But by 3 judges, it says...
that's his opinion about the 3 judges.
Yes.
And if you look at the halacha over here, top left-hand corner of page 52 in your book, or on the screen here, halacha, the intercalation of the month is performed by 3 judges. Similarly, the sanctification of a new month and the calculations for a new month must also be performed by 3 judges. So the halacha is in fact like Abaye. Abaye's opinion is the ultimate halacha. And the reason for that probably is that it is a braita of Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir often is the one whose opinion the halacha follows. So
No, I still don't understand. I'm sorry, because haven't we just said that the Gemarah notes with regard to the sanctification of month, this does not require 3 judges, and that's Rabbi Eliezer. So the two are conflicting.
Correct, and we kick out Rebbe Eliezer and we go with Abaye. They're having a discussion. You've got 4 different opinions. You've got Abaye, you've got Rava, you've got Rav Nachman, and you've got Rav Ashi, all putting their 2 penneth within about this 3 words that we had in the Mishnah, Ibur HaChodesh Bishlosha. Bottom line, which Rav Steinsaltz handily gives us over here on the left-hand side, turns out that Abaye wins the day on this particular occasion. And as I say, that is probably because he's quoting Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir is a heavyweight when it comes to halacha. Okay, so Leon, is that clearer than it was last week?
Yes, certainly.
Good, okay. You're only saying that because you want to move on. Okay, let's move on. So now this is interesting. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel now has a completely different take on the whole thing. We said that the process takes place with 3 judges, right? Whether we're talking about the calculation, whether we're talking about the examination of the witnesses, or whether we're talking about the announcement, the sanctification, it was 3 judges. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel comes along and says, wait a minute, it's not quite so straightforward. Let me explain to you, says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, how it really works. Let's have a look. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Bishlosha, when it says 3 judges, this is what it means. Tanya, we learnt in a braita. Ketzad, how it works. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Bishlosha matchilin. We start with 3 judges. Uvachamisha nosin v'notnin. Here's an expression which you need to know as well. And then we start with 3 judges, and then we go on to 5 judges when we do this thing called nosin v'notnin. Anyone know what that is?
Nosoim is a journey, isn't it?
And that's with a samach.
Oh.
And that's with a samach and an ayin. And this is with a sin and an aleph. But apart from that, you were right. Nosin v'notnin. Anyone know what that is? How does he translate it here? Debate.
A debate.
A debate. Okay, that's how he translates it.
Like Masa Matan.
Thank you, Marcel. That's exactly what I was going to say. What is Masa Umatan?
Negotiation.
Negotiation. Yes, it's a modern Hebrew word. Masa Umatan means business dealings. It's a negotiation. When you go into the shop and they say they want 100 shekels and you say 100 shekels for that, you must be mad. I'm only giving you 50. And then he says, okay, 90. And you say, all right, 60. And you end up paying 75. That is called Masa Umatan. It's called negotiation. And it's the same word when diplomats sit around the table around Camp David and decide which bit of conquered land they're going to give back in return for what peace treaty, etc. That is called
give and take, isn't it, Johnny? Give and take.
Give and take. That's right. Give and take. Masa umatan. It's but it means negotiation. It means debate. It's a modern Hebrew word. Masa, well, 2 words. Masa umatan. And so this is interesting to see this expression used in the Gemarah here. So they bring out 3 judges, they begin the whole discussion with 3 judges, and then they bring another 2 to debate the whole thing, to get there at the back and forth, if you like. V'gomrin bash b'shiva. Remember, this is Rabban Shimon Gamliel's opinion. He says, in order then, once they've made their mind up, they conclude with 7 judges. In other words, they bring another 2 before they make a final decision. Okay, and then let's have a look at what Steinsaltz says here, and then we'll go to the N at the bottom is a note. At first, 3 judges convene for a preliminary discussion with regard to the necessity of adding a month to the year. This now is talking about the extra month, the Adar Rishon, not the Adar Sheni, as we spoke about last week. The extra month, the Adar Rishon, which is intercalated, in order to make sure that Pesach remains in the spring. The preliminary discussion is done with 3 judges. If one says it's necessary to sit and deliberate the question of intercalation, and 2 say that there is no need to sit and continue, okay, the single opinion in favor of intercalation is negated in its minority, and the process ends. In other words, if you've got your 3 judges, one says add a month, and 2 say don't add a month, that's it. End of story. We don't add a month. However, Shnayim omrim leshev ve'echad omer shelo leshev. The opposite happens. You've got 3 judges. 2 of them say we need an extra month, and 1 of them says we don't. You would think simple majority, 2 against 1. That's what we just said the other way around. So you'd think 2 against 1, we have an extra month. No, says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. In that situation, Mosifin Aleihem Od Shnaim. We bring in another 2 judges, V'nosein V'notnin Badavar. They then sit and debate. All 5 of them sit and debate. So, recap so far. You start off with 3 judges. 1 of them says, I want an extra month. 2 of them says, no. That's the end of the story. No month. The other way around, 2 of them says, we need a month. And 1 of them says, no, we don't. We don't give in another month quite so easily. We bring in another 2 judges to discuss the matter. Now, let's see what happens when there's 5 judges. Shnaim omrim tzricha. If 2 out of those 5 say we need a month, and 3 or shlosha omrim eina tzricha, 3 says we don't need a month, batlu shnaim b'miyutan. The 2 are overruled. In other words, when it comes to not adding a month, a simple majority is good enough. We had it just before, 2 against 1 for not adding a month, end of story. 3 against 2 for not adding a month, end of story, we don't add. But what happens the other way around? Shlosha omrim tzricha. 3 say, yes, we need an extra month. Ushnaim omrim eina tzricha. And 2 say we don't. You'd think, simple majority, we add a month. No, says the Gemarah, they don't seem to want to add a month here, do they? Here, I remember it was like when my kids were playing table tennis or something. Whoever won the first game, the next one said, best of 3, right? And if he won the next one, okay, best of 5. And if he won again, no, best of 7. And he was chasing his tail. You know, it's basically gambling, isn't it? You're just chasing your tail. And this is what it seems to be to me here. They keep adding judges in the hope that they're going to overturn the decision that we need a new month. So 3 against 2 in favor of an extra month is not good enough. Mosifin aleim od shnaim, and they add in another 2. She'ein haminyan pachot mi shiva, because you need at least 7. If it's not a majority, you need 7. If it's not unanimous, I mean, you need 7 to have a quorum. to actually announce an extra month in the year. So let's have a look at the halacha. When considering intercalating the year, meaning an extra month, the deliberation must begin with 3 judges. If the majority decides to pursue the matter further, the court adds another 2 for further debate. If the majority of these decide to intercalate, the court adds another 2, and they proclaim the intercalation in this form of 7. This ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, as the halacha is always in accordance with his opinion in the Mishnah, and the discussions in the Gemarah follow his opinion. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, probably the biggest heavyweight of them all, or maybe equally with Rebbe, his opinion is that we have this 7. Now,
Is this all done by computer nowadays, Johnny, or do people actually sit down and work something out?
no, it was all done not by computer, it was all done by mathematical calculation.
Wasn't the Rev Philip Feingold an expert?
Yes, you can work out all sorts of things, but our calendar was fixed sometime in the first millennium. It started to be fixed in around about, what did we say last week, David? About 395 or something like that?
Yeah, maybe 50 years earlier.
Right, in the 4th century.
Yeah.
And then eventually it was fully fixed a couple of hundred years later at the time of the Geonim. And since then we've had a fixed calendar. So there are certain days that can never be, Yom Kippur can never be, for example, on a Friday. Which means if Yom Kippur can never be on a Friday, Rosh Hashanah can never be on a Wednesday. Okay, and there's various different things that are built into the calendar.
Lo adu Rosh for Lo Badu Pesach.
Lo adu Rosh. What's adu? Adu is Aleph, Daled, Vav.
The first day of Rosh Hashanah can never fall on a Sunday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday.
Yeah.
The Lord Badu Pesach, and the first day of Pesach can never fall on a Monday,
Wednesday, or Friday. Yeah.
Because they would either it would either mean that Yom Kippur is on a Friday or a Sunday, or Hoshana Rabbah would fall out on a Shabbat.
Yeah. So you can't have certain things like you can't have Yom Kippur either immediately before or after Shabbat. Doesn't work. So all these calculations were built in to the fixed calendar. Now, if you think about this, Johnny, you asked a brilliant question. Is all this done by computer? The answer is not only was it not done by computer, it was done, 1700 years ago by human beings working out astronomical calculations. Yeah. Quite remarkable sophistication. Yes, Jeffrey?
I might have mentioned this before, but our uncle, Albert Rodriguez Pereira, used to do the calculations for the Spanish and Portuguese prayer books. And he was credited for doing this for hundreds of years in advance. And that was his hobby. He was without computers. He's been dead 36 years.
He had a special book, Jeffrey, which he found in a bookshop. And I think that the book was not a Jewish book. I think it was a book done by, stand to be corrected on that, but it was a special book done by priests on the lunar calendar. I remember the book very well.
Interesting. There were people like Albert and people like Johnny just mentioned, Phil Feingold was another one. Today, both of those gentlemen are no longer alive. There's a guy, one second, Julia. There's a guy in Manchester called Rabbi Jeremy Stanton, who is one of these sort of, super geniuses, and he'll be able to tell you off the top of his head when the molad is in 3 years and 6 months time off the top of his head, because he can work it all out. So what's remarkable to me is that without computation, 1600 years ago, they could fix this calendar. And we think of ourselves as sophisticated, and we think of previous generations as being, idiots or ignorant, or we are so far off the mark. The sophistication of the argument in the Gemarah. I know I've said it many times before when we've been learning, but the depth of argument, the finer points of argument, and as Lord Tony Pandy said, that the Jews were having these sophisticated debates when the rest of the world were wandering around in caves. It's quite remarkable, the sophistication of the argument and the calculation. Yes, Julia, you've been very patient.
Thank you.
Well, I have 2 points really. I don't disagree with you at all, and I was thinking to myself, it must have taken huge amounts of time before the calculation was formalized for people to work all this out, and they must have devoted a lot of time to it. But actually, my main point is that it's very clear this was all done by men, because why didn't they stop Pesach being immediately after Shabbos, which is exceptionally hard? And I would have thought if women were involved, we might have had different rules. I'm not a feminist, but that is an observation.
It's a good observation. It's a very interesting observation. If I'd have been doing it, we wouldn't have had Pesach on a Shabbat either, because Seder night on Friday. No, you're right. It's a Sunday. I wouldn't have had it on a Sunday, because Seder night on Motzei Shabbat, as well as being hard for the women, it's a pain in the neck with getting rid of all your chomets. And you have to do all sorts of funny old loopholes. So yeah, you and I, Julia, perhaps we should do an alternative calendar. We'll make the Poleg version. Yes, David.
Could I respectfully disagree with Julia and suggest that for ladies in particular, Seder night falling on Motzei Shabbat is a lot easier, because it forces them to relax for 25 hours before Seder night, which otherwise is really, really stressful because of all the hard work that they've done in the preceding days.
Julia, would you like to respond?
No, I would refute that. But ask your wife what she thinks, okay?
She agrees with me wholeheartedly.
Of course she does, David. Of course she does. Very interesting. Okay. How did we get onto that? Yes, the calendar being fixed. Yes, the sophistication of it all, the calculation of it all, really very interesting indeed. So let's just do this note here. Gomrim b'shiva, they ended up with 7. Some say it's only necessary to have 7 when the smaller court does not arrive at a unanimous decision. You remember I said that actually a little earlier. If it's a unanimous decision, if the first court of 3 all agree one way or another, that's the end of the story. It's only when you have a majority and not a unanimous decision, and if you want to intercalate not unanimously, you need a quorum of 7 judges minimum. Now, one opinion is that the last 2 judges don't actually do anything. They just come in to make up the numbers. The 5 make the decision, and if it's 3-2 in favor of intercalation, so they bring in the 2 judges. It's not that they then have another debate and it, like best of 7, best of 9, like my kids playing table tennis. No, once they've made the decision at the 5 level, they just bring another 2 in to actually rubber stamp it, because you can't make that decision without 7 judges. I don't know.
What if it's 4-1?
It's not unanimous.
It's got to be unanimous.
Doesn't say that, Michael. It's a good question, but I think the answer is that it's got to be unanimous in order for it to not require 7. Now, what I'm interested in, and I don't know the answer to this, I did start to look it up. And see, the only thing I could find when I looked it up was it kept pointing me to this Gemarah, and that is where the origin is for 7 being the minimum you need for Kiddush HaChodesh. So if anybody can find that out before next week, it would be very interesting why Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that you can't make a Kiddush HaChodesh without 7 judges, because our Mishnah doesn't mention anything about 7 judges at all. Our Mishnah, of course, talks about 3 judges, and I don't recall seeing anywhere 7. And when I looked it up, they all seem to, I looked it up over here. If you can see here, Rambam Sefer Zmanim Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, it points us back to this Mishnah, to this Gemarah and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel.
Isn't it to do with the servants of the king in the next paragraph it mentions, where it comes from? 3, 5, and 7 come from the court, the king's servants.
Yeah, but the bottom line was the 7 is not a, it's not got a Torah, well, I couldn't find anyway, a Torah basis. And I think what the next Gemarah, which is talking about, is really asking my question in a way, by saying, well, hang on a minute, where do you get that from? And they bring here
Yirmiyahu.
well, you'll see it starts off with Birkas Kohanim and the number of words, but we'll do that next week. It's an interesting. The next bit of Gemara is a little bit more interesting and less mathematical than the last 2 weeks. So hang on in there. Leon will be very pleased to move away from this mathematical thing. I think Leon's much more esoteric, aren't you, Leon, than mathematical?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Any questions before we go?
Yes. You were actually born in Radcliffe, not in Manchester. Radcliffe was a part of Lancashire. And
you're quite right. You're quite right. I was born in Radcliffe, which at the time was part of Lancashire and not Manchester. I stand corrected.
Yeah, but now it's Greater Manchester.
It is Greater Manchester now.
Part of the Metropolitan Borough of Bury, but it's Greater Manchester.
That's because Johnny was born there. It's called Greater Manchester.
Yeah. Its official title now, I think, is Radcliffe, Greater Manchester, in the Metropolitan Borough of Bury in the county of Lancashire. But Marcel is correct. At the time when I was born in 1959, it was Lancashire. You're quite right, Marcel. We have to be accurate in our statements. I stand corrected. Very good. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.